In the quaint town of Willow Creek, nestled among rolling hills and verdant forests, a new day dawned with the promise of transformation. David Phillips stood by the large bay window of his modest two-story home, his eyes fixed on the dance of autumn leaves caught in the crisp morning breeze. The golden hues of fall painted the landscape, a stark contrast to the somber mood that had settled over the Phillips household for the past year. David's calloused hands, testament to his years as a carpenter, gripped the windowsill tightly. His weathered face, prematurely lined with worry, reflected in the glass, superimposed over the serene scene outside. As he watched the world awaken, his mind drifted back to the tumultuous year his family had endured, a year that had tested their resilience, their love, and their very faith in life itself. The most painful memory, the one that resurfaces with aching clarity, was the birth of his son, Lucas. What should have been a joyous occasion had turned into a nightmare that still haunted their waking hours. The complications during delivery had been sudden and severe. David could still hear the frantic beeping of machines, the urgent voices of doctors, and the heart-wrenching silence that followed when Lucas was finally born. The diagnosis had been devastating. Due to oxygen deprivation during birth, Lucas was paralyzed from the waist down. In that moment, all the dreams and plans David and his wife, Elise, had harbored for their child seemed to crumble like a house of cards. David's gaze shifted to a framed photograph on the mantel, a picture of Elise, radiant and full of life, her hands cradling her swollen belly just days before the birth. The contrast between that image and the Elise of today was stark and heartbreaking. The vibrant woman in the photo had been replaced by a shadow, a shell of her former self, weighed down by an overwhelming sense of guilt and sorrow. Elise blamed herself for Lucas's condition, convinced that something she had done or failed to do during pregnancy had caused this tragedy. No amount of reassurance from doctors or loved ones could shake this belief. It had become a poison, slowly eroding her spirit and dimming the light in her once sparkling green eyes. The weight of guilt and sadness that hung over Elise had transformed their once lively home into a place of oppressive silence and palpable pain. Gone were the days of laughter echoing through the halls, of spontaneous dance sessions in the kitchen, of animated discussions about their hopes and dreams. Now, conversations were stilted, limited to the bare necessities of daily life and Lucas's care. David's heart ached as he thought about the strained interactions between him and Elise. Where once there had been an easy companionship, now there was a chasm of unspoken words and suppressed emotions. He longed to bridge that gap, to reach out and comfort his wife, but every attempt seemed to push her further away. Lucas, now a year old, lay sleeping in his crib in the nursery adjacent to the master bedroom. David could hear the soft whir of the medical equipment that had become a constant backdrop to their lives. The sound was a reminder of the challenges they faced, but also of the precious life they had been gifted with, despite the circumstances. As he turned away from the window, David's eyes fell on the numerous adaptations they had made to their home to accommodate Lucas's needs. The ramp leading up to the front door, the widened doorways, the specially designed changing table, each modification was a testament to their commitment to providing the best possible life for their son. Yet, despite their efforts, a sense of helplessness pervaded their days. David felt it acutely as he watched Elise go through the motions of caring for Lucas, her movements mechanical, her eyes distant. He saw it in the way she flinched when well-meaning neighbors asked about Lucas's progress, in the way she avoided the park where other mothers gathered with their children. The isolation that had enveloped their family was perhaps the most difficult aspect to bear. Friends and relatives, unsure of how to react to their situation, had gradually withdrawn, their visits becoming less frequent, their calls more hesitant. The Phillips family had become an island unto themselves, cut off from the warmth and support of their community. As the morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the living room floor, David made his way to the kitchen. The routine of preparing breakfast, a task that had once been shared with Elise, now fell solely to him. He moved about the kitchen with practiced efficiency, the clinking of dishes and the aroma of brewing coffee providing a semblance of normalcy to the start of another day. Upstairs, he could hear Elise stirring, likely roused by Lucas's soft cries. The sound of her footsteps, slow and heavy, spoke volumes about the burden she carried. David paused in his preparations, listening intently, hoping to hear something or anything that might indicate a shift in her mood. But as always, there was only silence, broken occasionally by her quiet murmurs to Lucas. As he waited for Elise to come downstairs with Lucas, David's mind wandered to the countless therapy sessions and doctor's appointments that filled their calendar. Each visit brought a mixed bag of emotions, hope for progress tempered by the reality of Lucas's condition. The doctors spoke of potential treatments, of advancements in medical science, but the road ahead was long and uncertain. David found himself longing for a sign, a glimmer of the joy that had once defined their family life. He yearned to see Elise smile again, to hear Lucas's laughter, to feel the warmth of genuine happiness in their home. As he set the table for breakfast, arranging Elise's favorite mug next to a plate of toast, he couldn't help but wonder if such simple pleasures were now beyond their reach. The sound of Elise's approach, her footsteps accompanied by the soft whir of Lucas's specialized stroller, pulled David from his reverie. He straightened, plastering on a smile that he hoped would convey warmth and support. As Elise entered the kitchen, Lucas securely strapped in his chair, David was struck anew by the weariness etched into her features. "Good morning," he said softly, moving to help her with Lucas. "I've made some coffee and toast. How did you sleep?" Elise's response was a barely perceptible nod, her eyes never quite meeting his. She busied herself with adjusting Lucas's position, her movements gentle but detached. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. As they settled into their morning routine, David couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to change. The weight of the past year pressed down on him, threatening to suffocate the last remnants of hope he clung to. Yet, as he watched Elise tenderly feed Lucas, he saw a flicker of the love that still bound them together. In that moment, David made a silent vow. He would find a way to bring light back into their lives, to reignite the spark that had dimmed but not been extinguished. The path forward was unclear, fraught with challenges, but as he looked at his wife and son, David knew that giving up was not an option. The new day that had dawned over Willow Creek carried more than just the promise of transformation. It held the potential for renewal, for healing, for rediscovering the joy that had been buried beneath layers of pain and guilt. As the morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, bathing the small family in its warm glow, David dared to hope that this could be the beginning of their journey back to happiness. As the days in Willow Creek began to shorten and the crisp autumn air turned biting, David Phillips found himself yearning for a spark of joy to ignite their somber household. The weight of their circumstances had become almost unbearable, pressing down on their shoulders like an invisible burden. It was during one of his solitary walks through the neighborhood, a ritual he had adopted to clear his mind, that an idea began to take root. Passing by the local animal shelter, David's attention was caught by a small, wiry-haired terrier peering out from behind the glass. The dog's bright eyes and wagging tail stood in stark contrast to the melancholy that had become all too familiar in his own home. In that moment, a glimmer of hope flickered in David's heart. Perhaps, he thought, this bundle of energy could be the key to unlocking the happiness that had eluded them for so long. The decision to adopt the terrier, whom he would later name Max, wasn't made lightly. David spent days mulling over the idea, weighing the potential benefits against the additional responsibility. He imagined Lucas's face lighting up at the sight of a playful puppy, pictured Elise's lips curving into a smile as she watched their son interact with a new friend. The possibility of bringing life back into their home was too tempting to ignore. On a crisp Saturday morning, David made his way to the shelter, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The process was surprisingly quick, and before he knew it, he was driving home with Max nestled in a crate on the passenger seat. The terrier's occasional yips filled the car, a sound that seemed to chase away the silence that had become David's constant companion. As he pulled into the driveway, David took a deep breath, steeling himself for Elise's reaction. He knew that introducing a dog into their already complicated lives was a risk, but he clung to the hope that this could be the catalyst for positive change. Entering the house, David called out softly, "Elise? Lucas? I have a surprise for you." The sound of Elise's wheelchair approaching from the living room filled him with a mixture of anticipation and dread. As she appeared in the hallway, her eyes widened at the sight of the crate in David's arms. "David, what is this?" Elise's voice was a mix of confusion and wariness. Gently setting the crate down, David opened the door, allowing Max to cautiously step out. The terrier's tail wagged hesitantly as he took in his new surroundings. "This is Max," David explained, his voice filled with hope. I thought he might bring some joy into our lives. For Lucas, and for us." Elise's face, which had momentarily softened at the sight of the puppy, hardened once more. The lines of worry and exhaustion seemed to deepen as she processed David's words. "A dog," she said, her voice strained. "David, how could you? We can barely manage as it is. Lucas needs constant care, and now you want to add a puppy to the mix." David knelt down beside Max, running a hand through the dog's wiry fur. "I know it seems like a lot, but just think about it. Max could be a companion for Lucas, something to motivate him, to make him smile again." Elise's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And what about me, David? Did you think about how this affects me? I'm already stretched to my limit. I don't have the energy for this." The weight of Elise's words hung heavily in the air. David felt a pang of guilt, realizing he had underestimated the depth of her exhaustion and despair. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point, a chance to break free from the cycle of sadness that had ensnared them. "Elise, please," he said softly, moving towards her. "I know it's not easy. But we can't continue like this. We need something to change, something to give us hope again." Before Elise could respond, a small sound from the living room caught their attention. Lucas, having heard the commotion, had managed to pull himself to the edge of his playmat. His eyes were wide with curiosity as he caught sight of Maximum. In that moment, something shifted. Max, sensing a new presence, trotted over to Lucas, his tail wagging furiously. To David and Elise's amazement, a smile, small but unmistakable, spread across Lucas's face as the puppy gently licked his hand. Elise's resistance visibly wavered as she watched the interaction. For the first time in months, there was a softening in her expression, a hint of the woman she used to be peeking through the veil of sadness. "Maybe," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "maybe we can give it a try. For Lucas." David felt a surge of hope at Elise's words. It wasn't wholehearted acceptance, but it was a start. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but seeing that tiny smile on Lucas's face made him believe it was worth it. Over the next few days, the Phillips household began to adjust to their new family member. Max's presence, while initially disruptive, began to create subtle changes in their daily routine. Lucas, usually content to lie quietly in his specially adapted chair, now showed more interest in his surroundings, his eyes following Max's playful antics around the room. David took on the bulk of Max's care, determined not to let the responsibility fall on Elise's already overburdened shoulders. He woke early to walk the dog, carefully scheduled feeding times, and spent evenings training Max to be gentle around Lucas. Despite her initial reluctance, Elise found herself warming to the terrier's affectionate nature. One afternoon, as David returned from work, he paused in the doorway of the living room, struck by the scene before him. Elise was seated on the floor next to Lucas's playmat, Max curled up between them. She was softly narrating a story, her voice more animated than it had been in months, while Lucas gurgled happily, his small hand resting on Max's fur. For a brief moment, David saw a glimpse of the family they could be, the family they once were. The sight filled him with a bittersweet mixture of joy and longing. It was progress, small but significant. However, the path to healing was far from smooth. There were days when Elise's depression seemed to deepen, the added responsibility of Max feeling like an insurmountable burden. During these times, the dog's energetic presence only served to highlight the stark contrast between their current reality and the life they had once envisioned for their family. One particularly difficult morning, David awoke to find Elise in tears, Max's leash clutched in her trembling hands. "I can't do this anymore, David," she sobbed. "It's too much. The constant care Lucas needs, and now this dog. I feel like I'm drowning." David's heart ached as he gathered Elise in his arms, feeling the tremors that ran through her body. He realized that in his eagerness to find a solution, he had underestimated the depth of Elise's struggle. The introduction of Max, while well-intentioned, had pushed her already fragile emotional state to its limits. "I'm sorry," he whispered, stroking her hair. I hoped this would help. But if it's too much, We can find another home for Maximum. You and Lucas are what matter most." Elise pulled back slightly, her tear-stained face a mixture of anguish and uncertainty. "But Lucas, he seems happier with Max around. I don't want to take that away from him." David cupped her face gently, looking into her eyes. "We'll figure it out together, okay? One day at a time. If we need to rehome Max, we will. But let's not make any decisions right now." As they sat there, holding each other, Max padded into the room. The terrier, sensing the emotional atmosphere, approached cautiously, resting his head on Elise's knee. Almost unconsciously, Elise's hand moved to stroke his fur, the repetitive motion seeming to calm her. In that moment, David realized that Max was more than just a pet. He was a tangible representation of hope, of the possibility of joy returning to their lives. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with ups and downs, but as he watched Elise's breathing slow, her hand still absently petting Max, he felt a renewed determination. They would face this together: David, Elise, Lucas, and yes, even Maximum. The journey of healing had only just begun, but for the first time in a long while, David allowed himself to believe that brighter days lay ahead. As days melted into weeks, the Phillips household began to experience a subtle but profound transformation. The initial turbulence caused by Max's arrival gradually gave way to a new rhythm, one that brought unexpected moments of joy and connection. At the heart of this change was Lucas, whose world seemed to expand with each passing day, thanks to the presence of his furry companion. The first signs of this shift were small but significant. Lucas, who had often seemed withdrawn and disconnected from his surroundings, began to show a newfound interest in the world around him. His eyes, once vacant, now sparkled with curiosity as they followed Max's playful antics around the living room. The sound of the terrier's paws pattering across the hardwood floors never failed to elicit a smile from the young boy, a sight that brought tears to both David and Elise's eyes. One particularly memorable afternoon, as Elise was preparing Lucas for his daily physiotherapy session, Max trotted into the room, a well-worn chew toy dangling from his mouth. Without hesitation, the terrier dropped the toy at Lucas's feet, his tail wagging expectantly. To everyone's astonishment, Lucas reached out, his movements slow and deliberate, in an attempt to grasp the toy. "David!" Elise called out, her voice trembling with excitement. "Come quick!" David rushed into the room, his heart racing at the urgency in Elise's voice. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. Lucas, with determination etched on his small face, was using all his strength to drag himself towards Max and the toy. It wasn't a smooth movement, more of a strained wiggle, but it was movement nonetheless, something they hadn't seen Lucas initiate on his own before. Tears welled up in David's eyes as he watched his son, inch by painstaking inch, make his way across the floor. Max, as if understanding the magnitude of the moment, stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Lucas, offering quiet encouragement. When Lucas finally reached the toy, his tiny fingers closing around it, a peal of laughter erupted from his lips, a sound so pure and joyous that it seemed to light up the entire room. Elise, who had been watching with bated breath, let out a sob of relief and happiness. "He did it," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "He actually did it." David knelt beside them, gathering both Elise and Lucas in his arms, while Max nuzzled against them, tail wagging furiously. In that moment, the weight of the past year seemed to lift, if only temporarily, replaced by a bubble of pure, unadulterated happiness. From that day forward, Max became an integral part of Lucas's therapy sessions. The physiotherapist, initially skeptical about incorporating a dog into their routine, soon became an enthusiastic supporter of Max's involvement. She noted that Lucas showed increased motivation and engagement when Max was present, often pushing himself harder and longer than he had before. During stretching exercises, Max would lie patiently by Lucas's side, occasionally offering a gentle lick of encouragement. When it came time for Lucas to practice sitting up, Max would position himself just out of reach, enticing the boy to extend his arms and work on his balance. One of the most heartwarming developments was the way Max seemed to intuitively understand Lucas's needs. On days when Lucas was particularly frustrated or tired, Max would curl up next to him, providing a comforting presence. The terrier's steady heartbeat and warm fur seemed to have a calming effect on Lucas, often helping him through the more challenging aspects of his therapy. As Lucas's physical abilities slowly improved, so too did his emotional well-being. The genuine laughter that now frequently echoed through the house was a balm to David and Elise's souls. They found themselves smiling more, the oppressive cloud of sadness that had hung over their home for so long beginning to dissipate. Elise, in particular, underwent a remarkable transformation. The woman who had once viewed Max as an additional burden now found solace in the dog's unwavering companionship. On difficult nights when sleep eluded her, she would often find herself in the living room, Max's head resting on her lap as she poured out her fears and hopes in whispered confessions. David, witnessing this change in his wife, felt a renewed sense of hope for their future. The connection between Elise and Max seemed to open a door that had long been closed, allowing her to slowly lower the walls she had built around her heart. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Lucas and Max play in the fading light, Elise turned to David, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "For not giving up on us. For bringing Max into our lives." David squeezed her hand gently, his throat tight with emotion. "We're in this together," he replied. "All of us." As autumn gave way to winter, the Phillips family faced new challenges. The cold weather made it more difficult for Lucas to engage in outdoor activities, and the seasonal gloom threatened to dampen the progress they had made. However, Max once again proved to be a source of unexpected joy and motivation. On snowy days, David would bundle Lucas up warmly and take him out to the backyard, where Max would bound through the snow, creating a spectacle that never failed to delight the young boy. Lucas, determined to join in the fun, pushed himself harder in his therapy sessions, his goal of playing in the snow with Max driving him forward. The holiday season, which had been a source of pain and melancholy the previous year, took on a new light. Elise, inspired by Lucas's progress and Max's unwavering spirit, suggested they host a small gathering for close family and friends, something they hadn't done since Lucas's birth. As they prepared for the event, decorating the house and planning the menu, there was a palpable sense of excitement in the air. Lucas, seated in his specially adapted chair, supervised the proceedings with Max loyally by his side, offering his own form of assistance by enthusiastically wagging his tail at every new decoration. The day of the gathering arrived, bringing with it a flurry of activity. As guests began to arrive, David and Elise found themselves filled with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. How would people react to the changes in their family dynamic? Would they understand the profound impact Max had had on their lives? Their worries proved unfounded. The house soon filled with the warm sounds of laughter and conversation, with Lucas and Max at the center of attention. Friends and family marveled at Lucas's progress, their faces lighting up as they watched him interact with Max, reaching out to pat the dog's head or giggle at his playful antics. As the evening wore on, David found himself in a quiet corner of the living room, taking in the scene before him. Elise was engaged in animated conversation with her sister, her smile genuine and relaxed. Lucas was surrounded by a group of children, cousins, and neighbors' kids, all vying for a chance to play with Max, who was reveling in the attention. In that moment, David felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. The journey had been far from easy, and there were undoubtedly more challenges ahead. Lucas's condition was still a daily struggle, and there were no guarantees about what the future might hold. But as he watched his son laugh, his wife smile, and their loyal companion Max moving between guests with tail wagging, David knew one thing for certain: they had found their way back to joy. The small terrier that had entered their lives on a whim had become so much more than just a pet. Max was a friend, a therapist, a source of unconditional love, and a bridge that had helped them reconnect with each other and the world around them. He was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could be found in the most unexpected places. As the last guests departed and the house settled into a contented quiet, David, Elise, Lucas, and Max cuddled together on the couch. The warmth of their bodies and the steady rhythm of their breathing created a cocoon of comfort and belonging. In the soft glow of the Christmas lights, David looked at his family and felt, for the first time in a long while, that they were exactly where they were meant to be. As winter's icy grip began to loosen and the first hints of spring emerged in Willow Creek, the Phillips family continued to navigate their new normal. The progress they had made was undeniable, with Lucas showing remarkable improvements in both his physical abilities and emotional well-being. Max had become an integral part of their lives, his presence a constant source of joy and motivation. However, the path to healing is rarely linear, and the family was about to face one of their most challenging days yet. The morning started like any other. David rose early, taking Max for his usual walk around the neighborhood. The crisp air held the promise of warmer days to come, and David found himself filled with a cautious optimism about what lay ahead. As he returned home, the scent of coffee wafting from the kitchen suggested that Elise was already up and about. Entering the house, David was met with an unusual silence. Typically, by this time, the sounds of Lucas's physical therapy exercises would be filling the air. Concerned, he made his way to the kitchen, where he found Elise sitting at the table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of untouched coffee. "Elise." David approached cautiously, noticing the tension in her shoulders. "Is everything okay?" Elise looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a pain that David hadn't seen in months. "I can't do this anymore, David," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought I could, but I can't." David's heart sank as he sat beside her, gently taking one of her hands in his. "What happened? Talk to me, please." Elise took a shuddering breath, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I had a dream last night. Lucas was running, David. Running and laughing, like any other child his age. And when I woke up..." She trailed off, her gaze drifting to the window where the real world waited, unyielding in its harsh reality. "It hit me all over again. The weight of everything we've lost, everything Lucas will never have. And I can't bear it anymore." David felt a lump forming in his throat, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. He had known that Elise's journey towards acceptance was far from over, but the suddenness of this setback caught him off guard. "Elise, I know it's hard. But look at how far we've come. Lucas is making progress every day. We can't give up now." Elise pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. "Progress? David, he'll never run. He'll never play soccer or ride a bike or do any of the things we dreamed of for him. And it's my fault. All of it." The raw anguish in her voice was heartbreaking. David stood, reaching for her, but Elise stepped back, shaking her head. "No, David. I've been trying so hard to be strong, to be positive. But I can't pretend anymore. I'm not the mother Lucas deserves. I'm not the wife you deserve." As if on cue, Max trotted into the kitchen, his tail wagging expectantly. The sight of the terrier seemed to push Elise over the edge. "And this dog," she said, her voice rising. "I know you thought he would fix everything, but he's just another reminder of all the things Lucas can't do. I think we need to find him a new home." David felt as though the ground had dropped out from beneath him. The suggestion of rehoming Max, who had become such an integral part of their family, was like a physical blow. "Elise, please," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Max has been so good for Lucas, for all of us. You can't mean that." But Elise was already moving past him, her movements frantic as she began pulling out drawers and rifling through papers. "I can't do this anymore, David. I can't pretend that everything is okay when it's not. I need to get away. To think." Panic rose in David's chest as he watched his wife's erratic behavior. "Elise, stop. Please, let's talk about this. We can figure it out together." For a moment, Elise paused, her hand hovering over a stack of papers. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Then, slowly, she turned to face David. In that moment, looking into Elise's eyes, David saw the full extent of the pain she had been carrying. It was a pain born not just of their current struggles, but of shattered dreams, of guilt that had never truly faded, of a grief so profound it threatened to consume her. Taking a deep breath, David stepped forward, gently taking Elise's hands in his. "I know you're hurting," he said softly. "And I know that sometimes it feels like too much to bear. But Elise, you are not alone in this. We're a team, remember? For better or for worse." Elise's lower lip trembled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "But what if I can't be what Lucas needs? What if I'm not strong enough?" David pulled her close, enveloping her in a tight embrace. "You are the strongest person I know," he murmured into her hair. "And Lucas doesn't need you to be perfect. He just needs you to be here, to love him. That's all any of us need." As they stood there, holding each other, Max approached cautiously. The terrier, sensing the emotional tension in the room, gently nuzzled Elise's leg, offering his own form of comfort. Elise looked down at Max, her expression softening slightly. "He really has been good for Lucas, hasn't he?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. David nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "He's been good for all of us. Max isn't just a pet, Elise. He's become a symbol of hope, of resilience. He reminds us every day that joy can be found even in the most unexpected places." Slowly, Elise knelt down, running her hand through Max's wiry fur. The simple act seemed to ground her, bringing her back from the edge of despair she had been teetering on. "I'm sorry," she said, looking up at David. "I didn't mean. I don't really want to give Max away. I just felt so overwhelmed." David joined her on the floor, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I know, love. And it's okay to feel overwhelmed sometimes. But remember, we're in this together. All of us." As if on cue, they heard the soft whir of Lucas's wheelchair approaching. Their son appeared in the doorway, his face lighting up at the sight of his parents and Max gathered on the kitchen floor. In that moment, something shifted. The sight of Lucas, smiling despite the challenges he faced every day, seemed to put everything into perspective. Elise reached out, drawing Lucas into their embrace, while Max circled them, tail wagging furiously. "We're a family," David said softly, looking at each of them in turn. "No matter what challenges we face them together." Elise nodded, wiping away the last of her tears. "Together," she echoed, her voice stronger now. As they sat there on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the warmth of their family unit, David realized that this moment of crisis had actually brought them closer. It had forced them to confront the fears and doubts that still lingered beneath the surface, and in doing so, had reaffirmed their commitment to each other and to the life they were building. The road ahead would not be easy. There would undoubtedly be more difficult days, more moments of doubt and fear. But as David looked at his wife, his son, and the loyal dog that had become such an important part of their lives, he felt a renewed sense of hope. They had weathered this storm together, and they would face whatever came next the same way, as a family, bound not just by blood, but by love, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit that Max had helped them rediscover. As spring blossomed into summer in Willow Creek, the Phillips family found themselves in a period of transformation. The emotional upheaval of that difficult day in the kitchen had served as a catalyst, opening up channels of communication that had long been closed. Elise, having confronted her deepest fears and insecurities, began to approach each day with a renewed sense of purpose and hope. The change in Elise was subtle at first, but unmistakable. Her smiles, once rare and fleeting, became more frequent and genuine. She began to engage more actively in Lucas's therapy sessions, her eyes shining with determination as she encouraged their son through each challenge. The heavy silence that had once permeated their home was gradually replaced by laughter, conversation, and the occasional bark from Maximum. One particularly warm afternoon, David returned home from work to find the house unusually quiet. Concerned, he made his way through the rooms, calling out softly, "Elise? Lucas? Max?" As he approached the backyard, he heard a sound that made his heart skip a beat, Elise's laughter, clear and joyous, accompanied by Lucas's delighted giggles. Stepping onto the patio, David was met with a sight that brought tears to his eyes. Elise was seated on a blanket spread out on the grass, with Lucas propped up beside her. Max was prancing around them, tail wagging furiously as he chased after a small ball. What struck David most, however, was the expression on Elise's face, a mixture of joy, wonder, and fierce love that he hadn't seen in far too long. "David," Elise called out, her eyes sparkling. "Come quick. Lucas has something to show you." Intrigued, David made his way across the lawn, settling down on the blanket beside his family. Elise's excitement was palpable as she turned to Lucas, encouraging him gently. "Go on, sweetheart. Show Daddy what you can do." Lucas, his face scrunched up in concentration, began to move. At first, David wasn't sure what he was seeing. Then, with a gasp of realization, he understood. Lucas was using his arms to pull himself across the blanket, inch by determined inch, towards Max and the ball. His crawling, David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Elise nodded, tears of joy streaming down her face. He's been working on it all afternoon. I think he was inspired by Max chasing the ball. As they watched, Lucas continued his slow but steady progress across the blanket. Max, seeming to understand the significance of the moment, stood perfectly still, the ball at his feet, waiting patiently for Lucas to reach him. The journey seemed to take an eternity, each movement a testament to Lucas's determination and strength. David and Elise held their breath, their hands clasped tightly together, silently willing their son forward. Finally, with one last push, Lucas reached maximum. His small hand closed around the ball, and a peal of triumphant laughter erupted from his lips. Max responded with an excited bark, gently nuzzling Lucas's face. The backyard erupted in cheers and tears of joy. David scooped Lucas into his arms, peppering his face with kisses, while Elise hugged them both, her laughter mingling with her sobs. Max circled them, barking happily, caught up in the wave of emotions. As the excitement began to settle, David looked at Elise, seeing in her eyes a reflection of the hope and joy he felt. This moment was more than just a physical achievement for Lucas, it was a symbolic victory for their entire family, a tangible sign that they were moving forward together. From that day on, a new energy seemed to infuse the Phillips household. Lucas's determination to move and explore his world grew stronger with each passing day. Elise and David worked tirelessly alongside their son's therapists, developing new exercises and games to encourage his mobility. Max, ever the faithful companion, became an integral part of Lucas's therapy routine. The terrier seemed to instinctively understand his role, always positioning himself just out of Lucas's reach, providing motivation for the boy to push himself further. One evening, as David and Elise sat on the porch swing, watching Lucas and Max play in the fading light, Elise turned to her husband with a soft smile. "I never thought I'd say this," she began, her voice filled with wonder, "but I think Max has taught me as much as he's helped Lucas." David squeezed her hand gently, encouraging her to continue. "He's shown me what unconditional love really means," Elise went on. "The way he's always there for Lucas, never judging, never expecting anything in return, it's made me realize that's what Lucas needs from us too. Not perfection, just presence and love." David nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Max has been a blessing in more ways than we could have imagined," he agreed. As summer progressed, the Phillips family found themselves venturing out more often, rediscovering the simple joys of picnics in the park and lazy afternoons by the lake. Lucas, seated in his specially adapted wheelchair with Max never far from his side, began to engage more with the world around him. The change in Lucas was remarkable. The quiet, withdrawn child of a few months ago had been replaced by a curious, energetic boy who eagerly reached out to touch leaves, feel the grass beneath his fingers, and splash in the shallow waters of the lake. Elise, too, underwent a transformation. The weight of guilt and despair that had burdened her for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet strength and determination. She began to connect with other parents of children with disabilities, finding solace and support in shared experiences. One particularly memorable day, the family decided to attend a local fair. In the past, such an outing would have seemed impossible, fraught with too many potential challenges. But now, with Max trotting happily alongside Lucas's wheelchair, they navigated the crowds with a newfound confidence. As they made their way through the fairgrounds, David couldn't help but notice the looks they received from other fairgoers. But where once these glances might have been filled with pity or discomfort, now they saw smiles of admiration, for Lucas's bright eyes and ready laugh, for Elise's gentle encouragement, and for Max's unwavering devotion. At one point, they paused near a group of children playing a ring toss game. Lucas watched with rapt attention, his eyes following the colorful rings as they soared through the air. Sensing his interest, Elise knelt beside his wheelchair. "Would you like to try, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Lucas nodded enthusiastically, and David felt a surge of pride as he watched Elise patiently guide their son's hand, helping him grasp and throw a ring. The ring fell short of its target, but Lucas's face lit up with joy at the simple act of participating. As they continued through the fair, trying different games and sampling treats, David marveled at how far they had come. The family that had once felt isolated and broken was now out in the world, facing its challenges head-on and finding joy in the simplest moments. That night, as they prepared for bed, exhausted but happy from their day out, Elise turned to David with tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up on us. For bringing Max into our lives. For believing that we could find happiness again." David pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We're in this together," he reminded her. "Always." As they drifted off to sleep, the sound of Max's gentle snoring from his bed next to Lucas's crib filled the room. In that moment, David knew that while their journey was far from over, they had found their way back to each other and to the joy that had seemed so elusive for so long. The path ahead would undoubtedly hold more challenges, more moments of doubt and fear. But with the love they had for each other, the strength they had discovered within themselves, and the unwavering support of their furry friend, the Phillips family was ready to face whatever came their way, together. As autumn once again painted Willow Creek in vibrant hues of red and gold, the Phillips family prepared for an important milestone. It was time for Lucas's annual comprehensive medical evaluation, a day that had once filled them with dread but now held a glimmer of hope. The morning of the appointment dawned crisp and clear. David and Elise moved about the house with nervous energy, double-checking that they had everything they needed. Lucas, sensing the importance of the day, was unusually quiet, his eyes following his parents' movements from his wheelchair. Max, ever attuned to the family's moods, stayed close to Lucas, offering comforting nuzzles and gentle licks. As they prepared to leave, Elise knelt beside Lucas, straightening his jacket. "Ready for your big day, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety she felt. Lucas nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. He reached out to pat Max's head, drawing strength from his faithful companion. The drive to the hospital was filled with a tense silence, broken only by Max's occasional whines from the backseat where he sat next to Lucas's car seat. As they pulled into the parking lot, David turned to Elise, taking her hand in his. "Whatever happens today," he said softly, "we're in this together." Elise nodded, squeezing his hand. "Together," she echoed, her voice filled with determination. The evaluation was grueling, lasting several hours as Lucas underwent a battery of tests and examinations. David and Elise waited anxiously, taking turns comforting Lucas between procedures and keeping Max calm in the waiting area. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, they were called into Dr. Anderson's office. The neurologist, a kind-faced woman who had been overseeing Lucas's care since birth, greeted them with a warm smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Phillips," she began, gesturing for them to take a seat. "I have to say, I'm quite impressed with the progress Lucas has made since our last evaluation." David and Elise exchanged hopeful glances as Dr. Anderson continued. "The improvements in his upper body strength and coordination are remarkable. And I understand from your reports that he's even begun attempting to crawl?" Elise nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, he's been working so hard. We've been incorporating play with our dog, Max, into his therapy routine." Dr. Anderson's eyebrows rose with interest. "A dog? That's an innovative approach. And it seems to be yielding excellent results." She turned to her computer, pulling up a series of images that David and Elise recognized as brain scans. "What's truly exciting," she explained, pointing to various areas on the screen, "is the increased activity we're seeing in these regions. It suggests that Lucas's brain is forming new neural pathways, adapting to work around the damaged areas." David leaned forward, his heart racing. "What does this mean for Lucas's future?" Dr. Anderson's face grew serious. "I want to be very clear, Lucas's condition is still complex and challenging. The paralysis in his lower body is likely permanent." Elise's grip on David's hand tightened, but they both nodded, having long ago accepted this reality. However, Dr. Anderson continued, a note of excitement creeping into her voice. "Given the remarkable progress he's made and the adaptability his brain is showing, I believe Lucas may be an excellent candidate for a new experimental study we're conducting." The room seemed to hold its breath as Dr. Anderson explained the details of the study. It involved cutting-edge technology, a combination of intensive physical therapy, neural stimulation, and robotic assistance, aimed at improving mobility and independence for children with conditions similar to Lucas's. It's important to understand that this is not a cure, Dr. Anderson cautioned. But it could potentially help Lucas regain some function in his lower body, perhaps even allowing him to stand or take a few steps with assistance. David and Elise sat in stunned silence, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. For so long, they had focused on helping Lucas adapt to his limitations. The possibility of expanding those boundaries, even slightly, seemed almost too good to be true. What are the risks? Elise asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Anderson outlined the potential complications and the intensive nature of the treatment. It would require a significant time commitment, multiple surgeries, and there was no guarantee of success. Take some time to think it over, she advised. This is a big decision, and Lucas's well-being is the priority. If you decide to participate, we'll run more tests to ensure he's a suitable candidate. As they left the hospital, both David and Elise were lost in thought, overwhelmed by the possibilities and uncertainties that lay before them. They drove home in silence, each turning over Dr. Anderson's words in their minds. It wasn't until they pulled into their driveway that Elise finally spoke. "What do you think, David?" she asked softly, her eyes searching his face. David took a deep breath. I think we need to consider it carefully. It's a chance we never thought we'd have, but it's also a huge risk." They turned to look at Lucas, who had fallen asleep in his car seat, Max curled up protectively beside him. The sight of their son, peaceful and unaware of the monumental decision before them, brought tears to both their eyes. Over the next few days, David and Elise engaged in long, often emotional discussions about the study. They researched extensively, reached out to other parents whose children had participated in similar trials, and spent hours observing Lucas, trying to imagine what this opportunity could mean for his future. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing, watching Lucas and Max play in the yard, Elise turned to David with determination in her eyes. "I think we should do it," she said quietly. "I know it's scary, and there are no guarantees. But seeing how far Lucas has come, how hard he fights every day, I think we owe it to him to try." David nodded slowly, a mixture of fear and hope swirling in his chest. "You're right. If there's even a chance it could improve his quality of life, we have to take it." Their decision made, they called Dr. Anderson the next day to begin the process. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of additional tests, consultations, and preparations. Through it all, Lucas continued to surprise them with his resilience and determination, tackling each new challenge with a smile. As the date for Lucas's first procedure approached, David and Elise found themselves filled with a complex mix of emotions: hope, fear, excitement, and anxiety all rolled into one. But underlying it all was a sense of unity and purpose that they hadn't felt in years. The night before the procedure, they gathered in Lucas's room for their bedtime routine. As Elise read a story, with Lucas nestled in her arms and Max curled up at their feet, David was struck by the realization of how far they had come. The family that had once been fractured by grief and guilt had been rebuilt, stronger than ever. They had rediscovered joy in the simplest moments, found strength in each other, and learned the true meaning of unconditional love from a small, wire-haired terrier. As he looked at his wife and son, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the night light, David felt a surge of gratitude. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever the outcome of this new chapter in their lives, he knew they would face it together, as a family. Later that night, as David and Elise lay in bed, hands intertwined, Elise whispered, "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" David pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "More than okay," he replied softly. "We're going to be extraordinary." And as they drifted off to sleep, the gentle sound of Max's snoring from Lucas's room a comforting backdrop, both David and Elise felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were ready to face it, with hope, with love, and with the unbreakable bond that had grown between them. The journey that had begun with a small dog and a desperate hope for change had led them here, to the threshold of a new beginning, filled with possibilities they had never dared to imagine. And no matter what the future held, they would meet it head-on, together.